What's up guys, so we're gonna make a cute little amphibian called an axolotl. You've probably seen them before, but let's take a look at what they look like normally, naturally. So here is an axolotl. They're very cute, I think. We're gonna make a more cartoony axolotl, and I have one drawn like I did here. So we're gonna make this little cute axolotl in 3D. So first we open Nomad Sculpt, and we want to bring in the reference image. And I also want to change this to Metcap. I always sculpt in Metcap. So you just go to this little sun icon and change it from Lit PBR to Metcap. I like to use this regular one. Just makes it easier to sculpt. And also make sure that you're in orthographic. So just click this icon here and make sure that you're in orthographic. So we're going to be using symmetry a lot when we sculpt this. Symmetry just means that when we make something on one side, it will also show up on the other side. Here's a little example. If I tap symmetry and I take one of these tools and I drag it, if you drag one side, it drags the other side as well. So that's symmetry. Double tap to undo. And also, if we turn our sculpt, it's easy to sort of get lost to where it is in space. You can just hit this little cube here, just tap front, and then you'll know you're at the front of your sculpt. So the main few tools that we're going to be using is the gizmo. That's this thing right here. And this just moves it around. So this will move your sculpt around. Oop, we have symmetry on still. This will move your sculpt around, up and down, back and forth. These colored rings allow you to spin it. And these spheres, they allow you to stretch, pull, things like that. We're also going to be using the move tool and the drag tool. So these are here. And you can just tap this little tool icon if your tools are like this. I don't really like them like that. I prefer it like this. So you have the drag tool and you have the move tool. They're kind of similar. Move tends to move the whole thing, whereas drag just pulls a very small part. But both of them obviously move in a way that we're going to be using. And then we'll get to some other tools a little bit later. So let's bring in our axolotl. So we're going to go to this little photo icon here. We're going to tap reference image. And then we tap on the image. You probably don't have a minion there. And then you just have to find your image. So let's tap import photos. And here's our axolotl. So we'll tap on that. We'll tap add. And now our image is here. You can see it. You can just tap transform. And now you can move it around wherever you'd like. And once you have a nice little place for it, just tap the screen and it will be locked in place. And then you can move your 3D object around again. So this sphere is actually really big. The default sphere, you can see here, this is our RAM and our free RAM, our scene vertices. Scene vertices is very important when you're making your sculpt. You don't want to go too high. You don't want to get up to like 5-6 million. You want to avoid that if you can. So right now this sphere is 98.3 thousand vertices. That's the only thing in our scene. So you can see our scene vertices is also 98.3. As we add more to the sculpt, that number will continue to go up and go up. So you just have to keep an eye on that. We don't need our sphere to be this big, so I'm going to delete it by going to this option here and then tapping the delete. And then you hit add. And now we have another sphere here. And this sphere, we can tap the next icon over. And this one is only 6,000. So that's way smaller than the other sphere, and it's good enough for what we're going to use it for. So the process that we're going to do to make the axolotl is called blocking. I really like to block out my characters, and essentially what that means is we're going to look at him and we're going to kind of see what shapes make up different parts of his body, and we're going to use those shapes and sort of form those shapes, and then we're going to put all the shapes together, and that will make our axolotl. So first we have the sphere here. This will obviously be his head. So the first thing that we can do is duplicate this so we can have kind of a smaller sphere on the top of his head, sort of like a forehead type situation. So you want to tap this here. You can tap the 3 dots and you can tap clone. There's another shortcut here also. Since we're using our gizmo, we can hit clone here, and then we can drag the second one up. Now notice this says mirror and validate. All that means is that we're using these shapes before we validated them, so we can't use all the tools right now. This is just really, really basic. There's some special things you can do before you validate. Not too much with spheres, but don't worry about that. We'll validate in a second. Kind of just means, okay, you're serious about using this shape. This shape is now part of the sculpt. So if you noticed, I have the smaller, we want to make this smaller sphere on the top of the head. So notice how I kind of turn it in space. I'll turn it to the, to the right. And I'm just going to lower it a little bit. And I'm going to make it smaller. Something like that. And now let's stretch it. So let's take this blue sphere and just stretch it. So looking at it from the front, it should look something like this. And now tap on the bottom sphere and let's kind of shrink that as well. Let's move it up some. So it sort of looks like the top of his head. It sort of looks like pudgy cheeks. And that's just with, 2 spheres. Okay. Let's take the top one and let's just slide it back a little bit and see how that looks. And we can put it down a little bit. Maybe we'll stretch it. So I think something like that looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and validate these spheres. So I'll hit validate, and let's click on the other one. So we just tap on the other sphere and we'll hit validate. And that's a pretty good start. I'm just going to tap view so you can see it without the gizmo. So that's a pretty good start. Let's make these little, these cute little things that go out of the side of his head. So he has 3 of them. And I think the easiest shape for those, we could probably use spheres and stretch them, or we could use cylinders. So maybe let's try a different shape. So we're going to go here, the same place we added the cylinder, plus, and we'll add cylinder. Okay, so now you see the cylinder pops up right in the middle of our sculpt, but that's okay. So let's just take the red arrow and move it over. And again, if you get lost of where you are in space, just tap this little cube. That will bring you back to the front. All right, so now we want to turn this cylinder so this flat side is facing us. So an easy way to do that is to go here to snap. So we tap snap and you see 90 degrees. So whenever you have that engaged, it will turn this only 90 degrees. So now you know it's exactly perpendicular to where it was. You can tap snap again. That way, if you wind up wanting to move it around, it's not stuck on snap. So I'm just going to tilt it so we can sort of see it in the 3D space. And let's shrink it with this green sphere. And let's make the whole thing smaller, and we'll do that with this orange ring. can see as I get bigger, it's sort of harder to see, but this orange ring will shrink our cylinder. Now let's move it back towards the back of his head. Let's move it up. And let's move it over. And when these come off, I think they don't just come off straight, they sort of come off like, where if his head is here, and they sort of come off this way. That probably made no sense. But anyway, I want to take this blue ring and just sort of move them back so they're sort of facing away from him. So something like this for now. Now let's go up here and tap mirror. And now you see the mirror on the opposite side. So all we have to do is make these the same or similar shape as this. So now we're going to go ahead and validate these two cylinders. So we'll tap validate. And now you see all our tools come up. So what we need to do is figure out a way to stretch these sort of into a shape like this. So let's use move. And we want our brush to be, we want the size to be fairly big. So I'm going to put mine around 350. And just so you know, this is the size of the tool, and this one is the intensity. So we're going to leave that all the way up. So now we want to take our sphere and we just want to stretch it out with the move tool. So we'll stretch it out, something like this. And then we actually want to make the move tool smaller. So let's make it smaller to maybe around 225. And we're going to take this end and we're going to stretch it towards the head. Okay, so it should be something like that. So now we want to get sort of that U-bend, or sort of that slight curve. So let's set our move tool to about 350, and let's back it off of 100% intensity, or whatever the top intensity is. Let's bring it down to around 90. And now let's just drag these down some. We might have to make it a little bigger. Let's see how we do. I think that's good. I'll just push this over a little bit. So I think something like that is pretty good. So once you have a shape like this, we can take the gizmo, we can move it up, and then we'll take this blue sphere and just kind of skinny it up a bit. So then we have something like that. And here's a look from the side, from the top. Okay, so it looks pretty much like this. Our drawing is a little more curved. So you can take the move tool and just sort of, you really just have to maneuver the clay to be how you want it to look. And these are also really big, so you can take the gizmo again. You can make them smaller. And then you can just move it down and inwards, and just sort of put them so that, to make sure that they're going into the head. So once you're happy with your shapes, you can hit clone, and you can move it down. And you might have to sort of rotate and bring it out, and just maneuver it so it's right underneath the top one. And we want clone again because we want 3. So we'll do the same thing. We'll spin it. We'll move it out a little bit and up, so we can pretty much get it in the right place. So another important thing about making your sculpts is you want to keep your scene organized. So what we have here, this is the scene menu. We have the sphere here. So you can tap this little eyeball and that will make it appear or disappear. So we'll name this one head. So we'll tap on these three little dots, name. We'll name this one face. And now we have this mirror here, and this mirror is all of these things that we mirrored. They're underneath this mirror. So if that goes away, then they're only on one side. So let's just rename this. Let's name it 6 sides mirror. Okay. And we know that these cylinders are in the 6 sides mirror, so we really don't have to label these, but you know, you could if you want to, but as long as they're nestled under here, then I think they're fine. So now this part, let's label this one dome piece. We'll bring it up over, whoops. Let me go back here and see what I did. Oh, I think I somehow had, I had the 6 sides selected as well. So now that I only have this selected, I'm going to long press it and bring it up over the face. So now you can make other adjustments if you want. The only thing that I'm noticing is this one is a little further out, which I kind of like in the drawing. So I'm just going to take move. I'm going to tap on that one. I'll make the move tool quite big, and then I'll just pull it out a little bit. Perfect. So now let's make the body. So let's turn him so we can see the side of his head, and you can see left here in the cube. And we're just going to add another sphere. So we'll tap here, add sphere, and we're going to move it over. And then we're going to move it down because this is going to be this part of his body. So let's move it up a little bit. Maybe his neck comes like this and then it comes around like that. So I think that's pretty good. So let's go ahead and validate this sphere. And let's take the move tool again. And my move tool right now is at about 365. I can probably make it a little smaller. Maybe like 325. So we just have to stretch the body out to make this sort of shape. And that's the tricky thing with 2D is you can't really see the back of him, but you just use your best judgment. We can see that the front is flat. So I'm going to take a front view. I'll make the move tool a little bit smaller. And I want to make sure that I tap symmetry. That's very important because sometimes if it's not on, then you'll try to move it and, well, it's actually still symmetrical. And I'll tell you why it's still symmetrical and why it's reacting this way. When we added the sphere, we actually added it inside this mirror. So what happened was it automatically mirrored itself. So that's actually really good to know. When you add a shape, make sure you don't add it into a mirrored section. So let's just long press it, bring it all the way up. And while we're here, we'll name it body. And that's something that I do often. I forget, and then I wonder why my shapes are acting funny. And it's because I accidentally added them into a mirror or something like that. So now we'll go back to our sphere. We'll make sure that we have symmetry on. And we can sort of bring up this flat side. So let's just bring up. We'll bring this up to his head. So something like this. And now we can take the back and we can just sort of drag it out. And notice how I'm going to make the brush smaller so that it drags out less of the whole shape. And that's why I'll make it bigger and smaller. But for now, we'll just sort of skinny him up a little bit. I think something like this is pretty good. You know, there's going to be, just imagine there's a flat ground here. So we don't have to flatten out his stomach at the moment, but we just want to sort of just kind of match the drawing. Looks like his back is, this part comes out some. So this part comes down. His little arms would be here. Back is sort of like this. Kind of push and pull to get it to curve how you like it. I think something like that is pretty good. And we might make it smaller if we think it needs to be smaller. But for now, I think that's pretty good. So let's go ahead and add his little legs. So we'll go back here, we'll add 2 more spheres. And we'll drag them down, or we'll drag it down. We'll drag it to the left. And then we'll tap mirror. So let's shrink these up a little bit. Let's move them back. And I think I made his body a little bit too big, so it's an easy fix. Let's just tap on the body and make it smaller. Let's bring it up a little bit. Yeah, maybe something like that is a little bit better. So let's tap on our spheres, and we'll just move those close to his body. Sometimes you have to move it around a few different ways in order to see what you need to see. So I think something like this is pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and skinny his arms up a little bit with this red sphere. And I'm going to skinny them up this way as well. And now I'll bring them in a little bit closer. And I'll use this blue to sort of angle them out a little bit. So let's go ahead and validate those, because they look pretty good. So we'll validate them. And let's take our move tool. And the reason why we don't need symmetry on now is because now the sphere is within a mirror. So anything you do to one is going to happen to the other. So that's the only reason that we're not using symmetry at the moment. So let's just take the move tool and drag these up into the body. I'll swing around the back and just kind of drag them in there. And I sort of want his legs to come out a little bit here. So I'll make the move tool a little bit bigger, and I'll just sort of pull that out and push on this side. Maybe I'll just try to pull out the bottom. I think that's pretty good. And of course, you can position them sort of wherever you want. You know, you can make them, you know, thinner or pudgier as you know, however you'd like to make them. Maybe I'll skinny them up a little bit more. Okay, I think that's pretty good. So now he also has these little back legs, so let's make it easy. So make sure that we have our legs selected, and we can actually go to our clone tool, clone, and then we'll push this back to make his little back legs. So let's shrink it because they look really big, and maybe they don't need to be as tilted. So let's move them in. and just sort of find, you know, a shape that looks decent. Let's make them a little bigger, but let's shrink them. I think something like that was good. I'm going to pull them in a little bit closer, and that's where it gets tricky. You know, you just have to pay attention to the gizmo, because sometimes it is a bit hard to get lost. I'm used to seeing it, so I sort of understand it. And also make sure you don't tap on another shape by accident. That can happen very easily. And if that does happen, there's a lock down here. If you don't see the lock there, then go to this little option here, and then just tap lock, and it'll magically appear. But once you tap that lock, then you can't accidentally tap on anything else. Okay, so let's take the move tool, and I just want these to be, well, let's see, let me unlock, make sure I have my legs selected. And I just kind of want them to be a little bit more round. So I'm just maneuvering them with the move tool, just to sort of get them how I want them. So I think something like that is pretty good. Here's the top view, bottom view, clean and simple. And let's just go ahead and rename these. So this one is let's rename this front legs. Oops. And now sphere 2, we can rename those back legs. So now we're going to give him a nice tail. Let's turn him to the side. Scene, add. And we're going to use another sphere for that. So let's slide this back. We'll shrink it. Okay, so I'm going to validate this because we don't need to mirror it or anything. So I'm going to take move tool, and now I'm just going to sort of fashion a tail out of this. So as you can see here, he actually has, his tail has a bigger end. So I'm going to turn it from the top view. I just think it's easier to maneuver. And this is an instance where if we look here, the tail is actually in the mirror. So I'm going to bring that out and rename it tail. I actually don't know why they keep showing up in the mirror. It's quite annoying, actually. But now that the tail is out, just remember that I don't have symmetry on, so I'm going to turn symmetry on, because you want to keep the symmetry and you want to use it as much as possible until you don't need it anymore. And notice how I turn it on its side, so I can make sure that I'm doing everything the way I'm supposed to be doing it. I'll bring the radius down for the move tool, and I'll just stretch out the back. And maybe I don't want him to have too big of a tail. But what's important, I'll tap left. What's important is that if this is the floor, then I want this part to be down further. And here's something that might help us. Let's add. So we'll go to our scene, add, and let's just add another cylinder. And we'll drop it. And we'll shrink it like that. And let's just make it really big. And then we'll make it really flat. Let's move it back some. And now we can bring it up. So we can imagine that that's the floor. We'll go ahead and validate it. So now let's tap the tail again, the move tool, and now let's move it to the floor. So if that's to the floor, then we can bring this part up. And then it can come back down here. And then I'll look at the top view so I can sort of skinny it up to the body. You can make the move tool a little smaller if you need to. So we can sort of skinny it up. And we can actually adjust the body too if you need to, you know, make them sort of mesh up a little bit better. I think that looks pretty good. So now I'm just going to adjust it. I feel like his body might be a little long. I think I might want him a little bit small, a little bit more. So I'm just maneuvering the body just to give it that nice curve. And the tail, I'm actually going to shrink a little bit. And I'm going to slide it a little bit closer. I want him to be a little bit more compact. That feels a bit better to me. And his legs, I'm actually going to move those as well. Make them a little smaller. And I think I'll slide them in towards the body a little bit more. And maybe even rotate them forward. And all of this is really just looking and just figuring out, you know, how I want him to look. I'm going to use the move tool and just skinny this up so it matches up a little bit better with the tail. I'll make the moves tool smaller, and I just want to make the legs a little bit rounder. There we go. Okay, I think something like that looks better. So let's go ahead and add his little legs. So we'll go back here, we'll add 2 more spheres. And we'll drag them down, or we'll drag it down, we'll drag it to the left, and then we'll tap mirror. So let's shrink these up a little bit. Let's move them back. And I think I made his body a little bit too big, so it's an easy fix. Let's just tap on the body and make it smaller. Let's bring it up a little bit. Yeah, maybe something like that is a little bit better. So let's tap on our spheres, and we'll just move those close to his body. Sometimes you have to move it around a few different ways in order to see what you need to see. So I think something like this is pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and skinny his arms up a little bit with this red sphere. And I'm going to skinny them up this way as well. And now I'll bring them in a little bit closer. And I'll use this blue to sort of angle them out a little bit. So let's go ahead and validate those, because they look pretty good. So we'll validate them. And let's take our move tool. And the reason why we don't need symmetry on now is because Now the sphere is within a mirror. So anything you do to one is going to happen to the other. So that's the only reason that we're not using symmetry at the moment. So let's just take the move tool and drag these up into the body. I'll swing around the back and just kind of drag them in there. And I sort of want his legs to come out a little bit here. So I'll make the move tool a little bit bigger, and I'll just sort of pull that out and push on this side. Maybe I'll just try to pull out the bottom. I think that's pretty good. And of course you can position them sort of wherever you want. You know, you can make them, you know, thinner or pudgier as you know, however you'd like to make them. Maybe I'll skinny them up a little bit more. Okay, I think that's pretty good. So now he also has these little back legs, so let's make it easy. So make sure that we have our legs selected, and we can actually go to our clone tool, clone, and then we'll push this back to make his little back legs. So let's shrink it because they look really big. And maybe they don't need to be as tilted. So let's move them in and just sort of find, you know, a shape that looks decent. Let's make them a little bigger, but let's shrink them. I think something like that was good. I'm going to pull them in a little bit closer. And that's where it gets tricky. You know, you just have to pay attention to the gizmo. Because sometimes it is a bit hard to get lost. I'm used to seeing it, so I sort of understand it. And also make sure you don't tap on another shape by accident. That can happen very easily. And if that does happen, there's a lock down here. If you don't see the lock there, then go to this little option here and then just tap lock and it'll magically appear. But once you tap that lock, then you can't accidentally tap on anything else. Okay, so let's take the move tool, and I just want these to be, well, let's see, let me unlock, make sure I have my legs selected. And I just kind of want them to be a little bit more round. So I'm just maneuvering them with the move tool, just to sort of get them how I want them. So I think something like that is pretty good. Here's the top view, bottom view, clean and simple. And let's just go ahead and rename these. So this one is let's rename this front legs. Oops. And now sphere 2, we can rename those back legs. So now we're going to give him a nice tail. Let's turn him to the side. Scene, add. And we're going to use another sphere for that. So let's slide this back. We'll shrink it. Okay, so I'm going to validate this because we don't need to mirror it or anything. So I'm going to take move tool, and now I'm just going to sort of fashion a tail out of this. So as you can see here, he actually has, his tail has a bigger end. So I'm going to turn it from the top view. I just think it's easier to maneuver. And this is an instance where if we look here, the tail is actually in the mirror. So I'm going to bring that out and rename it tail. I actually don't know why they keep showing up in the mirror. It's quite annoying, actually. But now that the tail is out, just remember that I don't have symmetry on, so I'm going to turn symmetry on. Because you want to keep the symmetry and you want to use it as much as possible until you don't need it anymore. And notice how I turn it on its side so I can make sure that I'm doing everything the way I'm supposed to be doing it. I'll bring the radius down for the move tool, and I'll just stretch out the back. And maybe I don't want him to have too big of a tail. But what's important, I'll tap left. What's important is that if this is the floor, then I want this part to be down further. And here's something that might help us. Let's add. So we'll go to our scene, add, and let's just add another cylinder. And we'll drop it. And we'll shrink it like that. And let's just make it really big. And then we'll make it really flat. Let's move it back some. And now we can bring it up. So we can imagine that that's the floor. We'll go ahead and validate it. So now let's tap the tail again, the move tool, and now let's move it to the floor. So if that's to the floor, then we can bring this part up. And then it can come back down here. And then I'll look at the top view so I can sort of skinny it up to the body. You can make the move tool a little smaller if you need to. So we can sort of skinny it up. And we can actually adjust the body too if you need to, make them sort of mesh up a little bit better. I think that looks pretty good. So now I'm just going to adjust it. I feel like his body might be a little long. I think I might want him a little bit small, a little bit more. So I'm just maneuvering the body just to give it that nice curve. And the tail, I'm actually going to shrink a little bit. And I'm going to slide it a little bit closer. I want him to be a little bit more compact. That feels a bit better to me. And his legs, I'm actually going to move those as well. Make them a little smaller. And I think I'll slide them in towards the body a little bit more. And maybe even rotate them forward. And all of this is really just looking and just figuring out, how I want him to look. I'm going to use the move tool and just skinny this up so it matches up a little bit better with the tail. I'll make the moves tool smaller, and I just want to make the legs a little bit rounder. There we go. Okay, I think something like that looks better. So let's maybe give him a few little toes. I mean, why not? So let's use spheres. So we'll tap on another sphere. We'll go ahead and shrink it. And we'll bring it down. We'll shrink it again. And we'll bring it, slide it over. And we just want to bring it down into our floor, maybe a little smaller than that. So just something very simple like that, maybe a little smaller. I want to mirror it because I want it to be on the other side as well. And now we can tap clone, and then we can slide the clone off. So now he has two little fingers. And we can tap clone again. And maybe we want one, maybe we want three. You can slide it back, you can make it smaller since if it's a pinky, something like that. So there's another option if you want to give him little toes. You can tap the first one and you can clone that as well. Just make sure you're on the gizmo. You can clone that if you want to give him a little thumb type. And of course you can go anatomical if you want, but most of the time when I'm doing cute little characters like this, I'm not too worried about being anatomically correct. I'm just going to move this little toe off a little bit. Maybe something like that feels a bit cuter. It's all subjective. Okay, so I'm going to clone this one. And I'm just going to bring it back to the back foot. Okay. But I want to go here and make sure that I know which one I've just moved to the back. So I'm going to drag that one down to the bottom. And I'm going to rename it back. And these are all the front toes. So I'm going to select all the front toes and I'm going to join them. I'll rename this front. So now all those front toes are joined together. So we have back. We can clone, and then we can just make some other toes if we want to. I think 3 is good. So now I'll go here and I'll just join these. So I've selected them all and I'll just hit join. And we have our back little toes. Let's add let's add 2 eyeballs, sort of eyeball socket areas to the face. Again, we'll just use, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to add a sphere. Okay, there we go. So we have our sphere. Let's shrink it. Let's move it up. And we'll just move it into like an eye position. We'll shrink it a little bit. We can hit mirror because of course he's going to have 2 eyes. And let's hide this so we can see our reference. So let's tap on the floor. Let's label it floor. And we'll tap the little eyeball. So now we can see our reference. Okay, so maybe we'll make these a little bit, yeah, something like that. It looks like a pretty good spot on the face. So we'll go ahead and validate. So next we can start putting this together. And by putting it together, I mean we can join the body, the tail, and we don't want to join the head yet, but we can join maybe these three, I don't know why I keep on saying tendrils. They're not tentacles. I'm not sure what they're called. I'll have to look that up. Okay, gills. They're external gills. Finally found it. External gills. I never knew that. Okay, so we're going to voxel merge these together. So we're going to go into our scene, and we just have to kind of look to make sure that we're just getting the head, the dome, the face. Remember those. The eyes. There we go. So I'm just going to do the mirror and the sphere. And then we want these, the external gills. So I think is that this mirror? Nope. Nope. Oh, there we go. 6 sides mirror. Duh. So we want to highlight that as well. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things selected. And we want to voxel merge them together. So we're going to voxel merge at 200. Okay. So we'll voxel merge those together. Whoops. And what happened to oh, here's our legs. Okay, got nervous. So now let's rename this section as head. So now we have our head. So we can take the smooth tool and we want to make it fairly big, maybe like 100. And we want symmetry on. So now we're just going to smooth. And one thing I'm noticing is I don't see the head as being symmetrical. So here's how we can fix that. So sometimes when you voxel merge things together, the center line may kind of jump somewhere, but not be at the place where it's supposed to be. Like it should be down the middle. So there's a few things that you can try. Let's go to Gizmo and go pivot, reset, pivot. Okay, so that's not the center. You can see the gizmo is off. We'll go to Gizmo and we'll go to bake. All right, so now we've baked it. So let's go to pivot, reset, pivot. Now it's at the center, right where it should be. So now when we use smooth with symmetry, there we go. See, now we can see this other blue dot, and it's actually working the way that it's supposed to be working. So now we can just smooth everything out. We want a nice, clean, smooth sculpt. So just smoothing these out. If you have a problem and these are like meshing together, then that means that they're too close. So just undo and then tap on one of them, undo to before we voxel merge them, and just sort of spread them out a little bit, and then you can voxel merge them again, and it should be fine. So as you can see that it's starting to break down a little bit on the back, and that's okay for now. We'll fix that in a second. A lot of times what I like to do is smooth it out a bit and then actually voxel merge it again. So I'm going to go back in here and I'll voxel remesh it at 200. And you see it sort of just solidifies. And you can see a few artifacts when they're getting close to sticking together. And usually if you can just kind of smooth it out and it goes away. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Okay, I think that looks good. So to do the eyes and the mouth, you see here we have kind of like a little sliver and two little slivers for the mouth. So we're going to do that using a Boolean operation. There's a few ways to do it, but I think I want to try to do it just like the image. And that's when you use a shape to cut itself out of a different shape. Probably doesn't make sense, but I'll show you what I mean. So we'll go to the scene, add cylinder, and let's make this, let's turn it like we did before. So we'll go to snap, 90, whoops, and then we'll just turn it forward. Let's use the green arrow to bring it out front. Whoop, just be careful you don't use the little green sphere. And also you can turn off edit. We don't need edit. So now I'll just grab the green arrow and bring it out front. I'll just shrink it a bit. And I want to go here to this little cylinder up here. So I'll tap that and I'm going to go to parameter, post subdivision 2, and linear. So now we can go ahead and validate this. I'm going to take my smooth tool and just sort of smooth it out. Actually, let's undo. Let's make sure we have symmetry. Again, sometimes symmetry is tricky. Sometimes it just likes to stay off. Okay, so now we'll just clone this cylinder. Let's actually name this, we'll leave it. We don't need to name it yet. So let's just clone it. And we'll label this one cylinder erase. So now we're on cylinder erase. We'll go to our gizmo and just bring it up. And we'll make it bigger. Okay. I'm going to tap on the smaller cylinder, the first one we made, and I'm just going to shrink it, and I'm just going to bring it down a little bit. And this curve is what actually is going to be the eye. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this sphere to cut all of this out of this sphere, or out of this cylinder, and it's just going to leave that shape. So the way to do that is we go back to our scene. We have cylinder erase. Cylinder erase is the big one. So we want to select them both. We want to turn cylinder erase off. And now you can see the little ghost cylinder. So now you just want to voxel remesh them at 200. So you remesh them, and now you're left with this shape. Okay, so now we can use this as the eyes and the mouth. So first thing I'm going to do is clone it. Let's rename this one eyes. And then let's clone it. And let's rename this one mouth. Okay, I'm going to hide mouth for now. We'll just do the eyes first. So let's bring it up. And it doesn't need to be this long, so let's take the blue sphere and just kind of shrink it up. Something like that. Can move it into the head. And then we can sort of shrink it and we can put it where the eye is. Obviously, you can see that it's flipped on the wrong side, so we still have snap. We'll just snap it. Boom, boom. Now we'll just bring it down and then shrink it. And if you look at the reference, you can kind of, you can see how, let's make sure that you don't have snap when you want to move just like kind of fine details like that. So we'll just shrink it, and then we'll just slowly just move it back into the eye, into the sphere that we made for the eye, and just position it as best you can. It does take some getting used to working with the gizmo, so don't get too frustrated. It just takes time. Okay, that actually looks pretty good. If you want a little flatter, you can always squeeze it this way, and then it'll be a little bit flatter. But I think that looks pretty good. The only thing that I think we need is to kind of bend it a little bit. See how it needs to be bent out? So that's a job for the move tool, just like we did before, and turn symmetry off. Because we're going to mirror this, so we don't need symmetry just yet. Let's make our move tool bigger. The bigger you make the move tool, the more smooth your move will be. Okay, let's go back to the gizmo and just move this back into the eye. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so now let's take this. So we have our eyes and where we have that highlighted. So now let's go add and mirror. And now we have one on the other side as well. Okay, so here's our eyes. And remember, if you want to continue to sort of make this a little bit better, like it would be nicer if they were sort of an equal distance, like coming out of the eye. So I'm just going to push the end in. Something like this. So I just like to push and pull until it looks a little bit more natural. I think something like that looks a little bit more natural. I think that looks good. Okay, so now we can do the mouth. So we can unhide the mouth. So we'll tap on it, and now we can do the same thing. Let's try to get that closer on. Pivot, reset, pivot. There we go. So now let's smush it together. And what we want to do is, so let's try to make two of these. And the easiest way will be to move this one over. And then we'll go to our scene, add, mirror. So now we have two of them. Oops. So now I want to go and touch back in my scene and tap the mouth. Because if you tap the mirror, they won't move as though they're symmetrical. So you want to tap mouth. Now they should move the way that they're supposed to move. Okay, so it looks like we want to put them a little bit closer together. Maybe something like this. I think that looks pretty good. And now we'll just have to trim off these ends. So let's take the trim tool, and we can try it with just the lasso. So with the lasso, you can just draw. And since they're mirrored, they should just, whoop, maybe we need to do the other side. There we go. So I did the wrong side. So now it's trimmed, so now it's more like a smile. But I also noticed that I trimmed this side as well. And I think the reason that I trimmed that side is because I had symmetry on. So I just tapped undo. Let's turn symmetry off. And now let's try the lasso again. There we go. So now we only trimmed the middle and we didn't trim the sides. So now we can take these and let's actually voxel remesh them together. So we'll voxel remesh them at 200. Okay. And we'll just smooth them out. And let's check the symmetry on this. So you can see the symmetry is off again. So I'm just going to undo. And we want to change this symmetry. So let's go to our gizmo. And our gizmo is showing in the center. But I'm going to go to bake. I'm going to go to pivot, reset, pivot. So now let's use our smooth tool again. There we go. So now it's working the way that it should be. So now we can just sort of smooth this out. So we'll smooth it out and then we'll just move it into place. And take your time. Again, it is tricky to sort of to master the gizmo. It took me a while before I was comfortable with the gizmo. And I'm just sort of concentrating on the size right now. So I think I want it like, I might even want it a little bit smaller than I did in the drawing. Maybe something like this. So I think I want to bend it out like we did before. I'd like to bend it like Beckham. That's a good movie, way back in the day. So let's see. There we go. So that's not bad. So I'm just using the move tool. And I'm on the mouth. And I'm just pulling out the center. So hopefully when I move this in, it'll look a little bit nicer. So let's move it into the face. And I'm going to tilt it a little bit. And slide it in a little bit more. That looks good. I'm going to take move and I'm just going to move. See, the middle is out a little bit further. And I'm a perfectionist, so I'm going to push this in, the middle in a little bit more. I think that's perfect. So let's add his two little dots, just because they look cute. So we'll add some spheres. Okay, we have our sphere here. Let's call these eye dots, because why not? So we'll bring it up, shrink, 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 shrink. And they look a little bit smaller than that. Oops, a little bit smaller than that maybe. And I'm just going to bring it over to the general area where I think they belong. So I think it's something like this. And I'll mirror it. And I'll validate it. So now we can just sort of stretch this out. And I might actually use the drag tool, but let's try with move first. I'm gonna make the move tool very small. Whoops, make sure that we're on our little thingies here. So you just want to make one side round and then one side kind of pointy. Make the brush, the move tool a little bit bigger. Yeah, so we just want something like this. That's your basic shape. Let's smooth it out. And let's actually bring it down a little bit further so it's not so protruding from the face. And again, now this is, we're using a mirror, so we can take our gizmo, and if you want to move them a little bit further out or a little bit further up or something, you know, you can move them around as you see fit. I think I like that. Maybe I'll bring them up a little bit more. And I might actually bend them. I might actually use the move tool and just sort of, whoop, make sure I'm on them. Just bring the top up. So that way when I bring them back down, it should sit, it should sit a little bit better on the surface. There we go. And there's also a flatten tool. So if you wanted to flatten your shapes, a flatten tool will definitely come in handy. So a little bit of flatten and then a little bit of smooth, and then they're a little bit more flat now. So it's just another option. And we could actually do the same thing with these little cheek circles, but I feel like something like that we can just do with paint. So I'm not gonna push it with that. We'll just paint that in later. So if you notice, he has a nice sort of pose here. We can see his tail, but his face is facing us. So that's why I didn't want to connect the body and the head just yet, because let's say something like this is a good pose. We want his face to be looking directly at us. So we're going to select, go to our scene again. So these are the eyes here. So let's just go ahead and validate, join children. And these are the little eye dots. So let's just rename it eye dots, if you decided to make those. So we have the mouth, we have the eye dots, we have the eyes, and we can actually do the same thing with the eyes. So let's just select the eyes, validate, join children, and let's just rename this eyes. Okay, eyes, head, and then we have this mirror. So those are the legs. I'm going to rename that mirror legs. And this mirror is toes. It's always good to keep track of your layers to keep the guessing out of it. Okay, so let's go head, eyes, mouth, eye dots. Let's uncheck body. We don't want that because we just want the head. So let's say this is our view. Let's take the gizmo and just rotate the head so it's looking at us. I think that's pretty good. Maybe we want to tilt it a little bit. I think something like that is pretty good. So the only thing is, it might be easier to paint the head before... No, I think it's easier this way. We can always use local. Carry on, carry on. I'm always thinking of better ways to do things, easier ways to do things, but I think we're okay. So now that we've turned it, we just need to check out the body and check out everything. So I want to tilt the legs so that a little bit more of this leg is showing. But in order to tilt them, we just need to go to highlight the toes, which is now both of these, the front legs and the toes and all that. And we just need to validate. So now we just have toes, which is the front legs. Let's rename it front legs. So now we just have our front legs, and now we should be able to tilt it. There we go. So now we can just tilt it a little bit. We don't have symmetry on, okay. His arm's looking a little crazy, but that's all right. So another thing that I wanted to do was bring the body out a little bit. So let's just tap on the body, and I just want to maneuver it. So it's a little bit wider here. But the problem is, since we turn the head, I actually don't want to use symmetry anymore because the arms are different. So I'm going to turn symmetry off. I'm going to make the move tool quite a bit bigger. And I just want to bring this out a bit more. I want to bring it up on this side. And then I want to stretch it out on this side. Okay, so something like that. And I'm just going to bring this out a little bit just so his arm is not so sticking out so far. I think that's good. And again, we could do the same to the back legs. I honestly think they're fine. I don't think we need to rotate them. So I'm not really too worried about it. But if we wanted to, we could go to the back legs. We could select them all. And then we could validate. And then we can go to our gizmo. And then we could rotate them as well. And I just have to make sure you slide them into the right position. All right, I think that's looking good. And the next thing that I wanted to do is take the tail, and I wanted to curve the tail around a little bit more too. So in order to do that, I'm going to use the move tool really big, and I'm just gonna push it. Oh, let's take off symmetry, and now I just want to push it. Just so it has a nice bend in it. Pivot, reset, pivot, and then I'll bring it back. So I'll bring it back a little too far, and then I'll just curve it with the gizmo. Okay. You can actually maybe turn it a little bit more even. I think that looks cute. So let's bring back the floor and just make sure that we're all lined up. It looks good on the floor. I do think that I can make his chest come out a little bit more. So I might just pull that out. I think that looks pretty good. And if I wanted to, I could use the flatten tool. I don't think I'm going to actually use it because I think I'm just going a little overboard, which is my nature if you've seen any of my other tutorials. But in the drawing, it is pretty flat in the front. So, and here's how I would flatten it out. Something like that. And it also just makes a nice plane. And by plane, I mean, it just makes like a nice area that the light can sort of catch right there. Alrighty, so there are a few other things that we can test out. Like perhaps it might be nice to join the toes and the legs. So in order to do that, we have the front legs. So let's see what it looks like if we voxel remesh them at 200. I think they look pretty good. So now I'll just smooth. And now he has his little feet, his little toes that are attached. And it looks like the symmetry did its job. They're nice and symmetrical. And we can do the same thing with the back legs. So we'll voxel remesh at 200. And then we'll just do a little bit of smoothing out just to get them nice and smooth. So now let's voxel mesh the body and the tail. So we have the body and the tail, and let's voxel remesh them at 200. And the reason I do 200 is because it's like a nice center point where it's not too hard, it's not too soft, it's still easy to manipulate and smooth out and things like that, but it's not too soft. So that's usually the number that I use. Let's take the legs and just kind of smooth them out because they're shaped a little funny back here. Sometimes a little smooth can go a long way. Okay. Oh, the front looks like it needs some shading. So we could voxel merge the head and the rest of the body. You know, sometimes I don't voxel merge them, but I think in this instance it might be better to voxel merge them. But before you do that, let's make sure that our head is in the right place. So we have head, eyes, mouth, and eye dots. Let's make sure that we don't have tail selected. And we'll go to our gizmo and we'll just make sure that we're happy with the location of the head. I think that looks pretty good. So now that I've positioned it here, I think I want to just actually bring this back a little further. So I'll use move and make it really small. And I'll actually turn symmetry off. I don't want symmetry. So I'm going to turn symmetry off and do the same thing that I just did. Okay. Just smooth out this area. I think that looks pretty good. So one thing that you have to be aware of is you know, if you do decide to voxel remesh this, any parts that are touching are going to like be molded together. So you just have to be careful of that. And there's ways that you can sort of fix it. Like for example, if you want to use the move tool and sort of move the body out of the way, you know, you could try that. So that's one way to sort of help with that situation. You can just sort of move it out of the way. That's actually pretty good. I think that works. So once you have your head in a place that you like, at an angle that you like, one last thing, is he looking up too far? Let's see. Let's see what it looks like if he was looking down a little bit. Head. Yeah, I think that's better. It's always good to experiment before you merge. So let's take the head. So we have the head. We don't want the eyes. We don't want the mouth. We don't want the eye dots. I think we just want tail, which is now the body. So let's voxel remesh that at like 250. All right, so now let's go ahead and smooth. And just, you know, smooth things softly because you don't want, the clay is fairly soft, so you don't want to move any of these are probably a bit delicate, so we don't want to move them too much because they can easily sort of lose their shape. All right, I think he looks good. So now he's all together. So just as a little cleanup, before we turn this into, before we start to paint him, we kind of want to, let's tap left. We kind of want to trim this a bit. So let's tap the tail, which is now the body. Let's go to trim, rectangle, and I'm just going to trim using this cylinder. So I'm just going to trim that way, just so I can show you. That way this is trimmed and it's not going beneath. We can do the same thing with the legs. So let's just grab front legs and legs. We'll get rid of the floor. And let's join them. So let's just join. So all the legs are together now. And we can use our trim rectangle. I'll tap left. And let's just trim them. It doesn't have to be too close, but I just don't want it to completely be, I think that's better. Just a little trim. Nothing too fancy. All right. I want to add some skin folds over the legs, my favorite. So let's use inflate. The inflate tool here. And radius can be about, let's try 70 for now. Intensity is about 65. Maybe we'll raise it up to about 80. So we want to be on the tail, which we will rename to body. Okay, so what I like to do is just kind of go over like so. And it just gives a nice little plump skin fold. We have to do the same thing over here. Let's turn off symmetry because the body's not symmetrical anymore. So we want to do the same thing around this arm. Like so. And then I'll do the same thing on the bottom here. I love a good skin fold. It's just an easy way to really make characters look realistic. And I always like to smooth out the bottom. Again, I'm smoothing really soft because I don't want to lose much of this beautiful shape that we have. So I'm just softly smoothing just to get it nice and realistic. Nice. The only other place I was thinking is maybe an inflate around the tail. I think I believe that. And I want to make this floor smaller. Okay, so let's go up here to the shading window. And let's change it from Metcap to Lit PBR. So this is just your default standard. The only thing that's lighting him right now is, if you look in this window again, is the environment. And this is my own environment. There's plenty of free environments. This one I actually sell on my Gumroad. I made it in Procreate, but these are the stock ones, so it'll just look a little different depending on which one you use. But feel free to use any of those. Looks very different. So now that he is lit PBR, usually I do the lighting before I paint him, before I do any of the painting. Oh, let's move this back up. Let's get rid of our, where is it? Reference image for now. We'll go in this little sun one, we'll turn the environment off, and then we will add our first light. So this is a directional light. It's kind of like the sun. It's kind of all encompassing. And I actually think that looks pretty good where it is. Of course, you can move it around and the whole scene will change. But I kind of like where it was to begin. And let's select all of this. And we'll go to the color here. So down here, just tap this circle. And then you can just move it to white. And you can adjust the roughness. We don't want it too rough. So maybe 0.425. And then you just tap paint all. So now it's actually white, so we can get a better idea. So we can tap on the light, and then you can tap on the options in this little black window. It's the same thing as if you were to go here and tap the icon here. So here we can change the intensity, we can change the color of the light here, we can change the intensity. So let's make it a little more intense. Let's just make it white for now. So we'll name this World 1. So let's add a new light, and maybe we want to put this in another direction. So let's move it over, and we'll just swing it to another direction. And wherever this white arrow goes, that's where the light goes. So you see what I like to do is kind of shade it. So we had the one light coming here and all this was shadow. So I kind of like having another light coming the opposite way, but maybe just not as intense. So something like this, I think looks okay. And also make sure you save often. I'm really bad with saving actually. So now it might be nice to have like a rim light. So let's maybe put a light behind him. I'm not sure which direction. Maybe there's more shadows over here. So we'll add a light and we'll call this one, let's rename it by touching the pencil. Rim light, back. And let's change this one to a spotlight. So now I'm going to turn this and I'm going to push. The lights move the same way, it's the same gizmo, but you can maneuver all the lights and stuff where you need them. So I'm thinking maybe something like this. So you notice I put the light behind him and I sort of just face it forward. I really want to find some pops of light I'm not sure how just yet, but even something like that, I just want to find some pops of light that make sense. I think something like that looks pretty good actually. And it even looks nice when it's just on his back. And there's other little options here, like you can change the cone angle. I mean, you can change like how big the cone is. The cone being like where the light is going to hit. So something like that I think is pretty good. So we do have another light, but we can just save that for now, because I think this looks pretty good. Okay, so now let's turn our environment back on and just see if we need it. So we'll tap environment. It's very, very bright, so we can turn this down. And then slowly go up and just see how much of it you need. And the catch is that this is supposed to be white, so it looks gray, so that means that our scene is a little bit dark. But I think that's a pretty good start. So coloring is very easy. You want to tap on whatever the section is that you want to color. And you want to tap this little circle here. And this is your color. Roughness makes it rougher or more glossy. No roughness, it's glossy. It's like porcelain. All the way roughness, it's very matte. And you have metalness, of course, too. Metalness will just make it look sort of like, you know, something like this. So there's lots to play around with, but we just want to make him pink. So let's just make this neutral again. So here's the paint tool, and you can hold your finger and just grab the color. The reason I'm grabbing the color is because I like his level of roughness where it is. So that's why I grab the color. I don't want him to be white, but you grab both the color and the roughness. So since I wanted to match it, put my finger on it. Now I can change the color. And let's bring back our reference. So we'll tap this little picture window, reference, transform. Let's move it. Let's move it up here. And we'll tap. Okay, so now we can just match this color. I think that's pretty good. It's a pretty good start. So I'll go paint all. And the legs can be the same color. Paint all. And his little eyes, we'll make those a very matte black. So I'll bring the roughness up some. And the same with the mouth. And his little eyes, let's just tap his little eye dots. And I'm going to grab this color because I want it to be lighter than this color. So now I'll just bring that lighter. So something like that. It might be nice I might make these glow, actually. So the only other painting we have to do is a little bit of painting on his belly. And we want to paint these darker. So let's use another layer. So here I've tapped on these layers, this layer icon, add layer. And let's name this gills. All right, so now let's grab this color and let's figure out a nice dark. Ooh, actually I feel like he should be this color. I kind of like that better for him. I think that's a better match. Let's go ahead and paint all. It's what I call happy accidents. That's much better. So now we really have to find a color for the thingies. So it's a little more, it's definitely darker, but they're more of a purplish red almost. Maybe something like that. So I think this is a decent color. So let's take paint, make sure that we're on our gills layer, and we're just going to paint these guys. I'll just start in the front. Unfortunately, symmetry is not going to work because it's just not symmetrical anymore. So that was the only thing that I was a bit worried about. I like to do everything with symmetry, but you don't always have to. Especially something like this. I mean, there's not that much painting for him, so it's not that big of a deal. If it was a really complicated piece, then I would want to keep the symmetry because that would make it a lot easier. All right, now we're just painting and painting. It's actually pretty good color matches. And again, we're doing this on a different layer, so you know, if we need to make any changes, it just makes it a lot easier to have it on its own layer. Okay, these are looking good. And now I'm just going to erase these random, oops. Okay, so apparently I did the gills and that color on the same layer. Interesting. So I have to take this color and paint over it. Not ideal, but it happens. Whoops. Go fix this little paint job. Okay, and now he looks good to go. Let's go ahead and make the eye dots. Let's make them glow. So we have eye dots here. Let's go ahead and clone, and let's rename it to eye dots glow. So now we'll take the glow and we'll tap this little icon here, the materials, and we'll do additive, always unlit. And you can see they just kind of look white, so what we need to do is change the color so that they're like kind of pinkish. Okay, paint all. And you can actually paint the one underneath. So we'll just go to the regular eye dots, because that actually makes a difference too. Maybe something like this. Okay, so lastly, for the paint, let's tap on the body, and then we'll make a new layer, and we'll label this lighter. Excuse the sirens. So let's just make this a little lighter. If you saw, I'm using the paint tool, and I grab the color, and then I go to this sphere, and I just make it a little lighter. And this would have been another point where symmetry would work, but he's just not symmetrical anymore. So if we look at this, he has a little round piece here. Let's turn symmetry off. That way it's not doing anything randomly in the background. Okay. And we can actually solo the body. I know it's a bit creepy, but when you solo, then that's all that you see. So I want to just put a little bit of a lighter bottom. Something like that. Let's tap solo. There we go. So now he has a nice little wider, nice little like lighter bottom that matches the picture. Now he also has two little round things here. So let's do that. We'll do it on a new layer in case we mess up. I mess up often. So they look like they're about here. Let's see how this looks. So we might have to use dynamic typology, so that will allow us to not raise the resolution of the body, but still get details. Because the body is not super dense, so details are going to be a little difficult, but you can go, let's see, where's it at? You can go here, and then you go to dynamic typology, enabled. And let's see if it works well. Let's make our brush smaller. Now this should be very clear circle. Much more clear than it was. So we'll do one on this side too. Okay, good. So the only other thing that we can do, let's get rid of the reference. And let's check out post-process. So that's this option here, post-process. And you can see now he's blurry, so if you tap on it, it should come into focus. And the reason he's blurry is because of depth of field. So we'll turn near down. You can actually turn far down a bit. Some looks good, but you don't want too much. So there we go, something like that. And you have a lot of options here to play around with. I'm going to turn my render resolution up. I'm going to save, because we've come a long way. I don't want any crashes. And back to post-process. Global illumination. So we'll turn that up. Ambient occlusion is all the way up. So this would be good to experiment with. I think it looks better when it's not all the way up to the top. Curvature bias. Okay, looks good. Bloom has to do with the way that the light hits, and if it kind of does that glowy thing. I think everything else is good. You can kind of play around with all that stuff, but those are the most important points. And also, this light is actually very, very bright. So maybe we need to turn it down a little bit. So let's go into the light settings and just kind of tone it down a little bit. Okay. But let's add another light. And this one actually looks pretty good. Kind of puts it in a nice light. And I still want to turn the far blur down a little bit. Whoop. Somehow I hit undo by accident. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. I'm quite happy with how she looks. I'm going to hit view. And you can hide the lights by going here, and you can hide the light icons. Okay, so yeah, I'm pretty happy with this. I'm probably going to work a little more on it, but for the most part, I think we can call it quits. There's always a ton of things I want to work on, but I think for now, we'll call it a day. And I'm very, very happy with this little axolotl. I think it's very, very cute. So one of the extras that I did when I continued working on the axolotl was to bring in these little flowers. I call them these little ground flowers. And this is how you import it. So you go to this little folder here, then you go to add to scene. So you tap add to scene, you find ground flower, and then it will show up here. Now, as you can see, it's really big. And one fun thing that you can do is, of course, you can make them smaller and you can place them on your scene like this. And I've already set the layers. I've already set everything so the middle is glowing, but you can go in there and change the colors if you wanted to. If you want to change the color, then just go into the menu and you have center sphere, and center sphere glow. It's a tongue twister. And you can just change those colors. Like, let's say you wanted like a light blue. Just make both of them light blue. And then it will glow a light blue. Another really cool thing that you can do with this ground flower is, say, it's quite big. So you can actually move it down. And you can sort of, let's get rid of these center spheres. And you can sort of make it so he's like sitting in the middle, which is kind of nice. You might have to do some adjusting of the other shapes. So for example, I put all these flowers in, which you won't have. So let me just get rid of these real quick. And then I would take this little round sphere or cylinder and maybe make it smaller. And then I would take my ground flower and I would just move it so he's directly in the middle. So something like that. And maybe move it up. Like that. That's kind of fun. So then you could also like put him in the middle. I don't know if I might do a version like this because I think it's adorable. I think it's really fun. So I might do something like that as well. Another thing that you should do is change your sculpt from orthographic to perspective, and then you can change their perspective here. And of course, here you have all your saving and exporting. These exports are just for example, I exported as a GITF. That's what I exported this ground flower. That way it has all the different layers and saves everything and the colors and things like that. So that's what that's for. So if you wanted to export the axolotl, you could highlight the whole axolotl and then you could export it as GITF or OBJ, things like that. But render is when you want to just make an image of it. So you can have transparent background and you can change all of these options to your different sizes. And then you would just hit export and go through those steps. And one more thing, when you have post-process, when you're finally ready to export, just make sure that you turn the render resolution up. That way you'll get the clearest image that you can get. And last but not least, another thing that I did with the axolotl is I changed his, I'll tap on him and I go up here and I change his body, the material, from opaque to subsurface. So again, I just tapped on him. Let's see if I tap on his legs. Then I go up here and see they're still opaque, and I can just make them subsurface if I want, but they actually look fine. They look fine opaque. But his upper part of his body, I made subsurface. All right, so I think that's it. I'm very happy with this little axolotl. Have fun with him, experiment, try things out. That's really the only way that you learn. And yeah, I can't wait to make something else. Feel free to drop your questions, comments. Be sure to upload your axolotl to the class project. I can't wait to see, and all that other stuff. But we'll chat a little bit more in the next video.
Mm-hmm.